Good evening and welcome back to Vegas October 1 Sounds. Tonight we're going to use our net tools or noisetools.net decibel map again to do a little examination of the frequency response and amplitude response for a system of speakers that could have been used in the venue. Now this tool doesn't have a good model for speakers, and we're going to have to play a few great games here because a point source does not really represent the distribution pattern for speakers. Speakers are, pretty much all up front by design. But we'll get into that in a little bit. So what I've done is I've got a pretty large magnification here, and I've placed some 16 speakers at the south end of the venue, and you can tell that because we've got these. Oh, wait a minute. There's only 5 there. Huh. Well, there's 6. There should be 6 there. 6 of these VIP things there. Speakers, and then that's the barrier on the boulevard side. So, for each of these speakers, what I've done is I've set the power level to be 100 decibels evenly across the spectrum. And I do that so that we can watch what the frequency response does as a function of distance and or amplitude collaboration between all the speakers. So to measure the frequency response, I'll place at least 1 meter here every 50 meters, which is every 150 feet, roughly speaking. And of course then I'll put one somewhere right in front of the stage. And what these little meters tell me is the amplitude, basically the decibel number, which you could read off the background itself, but these give it to you right up front. But they also have these little miniature histograms in there which tell you what's happening at each of those frequency bands that I just showed you. And so you'll notice here that as we go from when we're close to the speaker, in this case we're 1, 2, 3 little squares away from that speaker, and each square is 10 meters, so we're 30 meters, so we're about 100 feet away from the first speaker. If I move that over there, we could get a much better representation. You can see there that while we're tens of feet away from that speaker, the frequency response is pretty evenly all the way across, and we get a decibels of almost 91 decibels. So now we'll notice these numbers here, that as we go 150 feet we drop from 53.7 to 56, which is about a 3 decibel drop, and for the next 150 feet we get about a 3 decibel drop, and then for let's talk in meters, 50 meters, I get from 59 to 65, and that's 6 decibels. And then for the last ones we get from 65 to 90, which is 25 decibels. So as you can see, it's not an even, or it's not a linear scenario. And so you have to be aware of this fact, because if you think that for every evenly distributed step you take, the sound is going to decrease by the same amount, that's not true. It's only approximately true after you get a substantial distance away from the speakers, which in this case, after 100 meters or 300 feet, then it approximately turns into a linear scale, dropping about 3 decibels for every 50 meters. And you can say, well, that's all good and great. But what about for the amplitude? What about this little frequency response up there? I see, well, here close to the speakers we see that each one of those bands or frequencies, and remember those are, whoops, wrong thing. Those are well, I don't want to turn it on because then we'll have to, let's see if I can get up there. I can get it. Each band, the first band is a center frequency of 31 hertz, next one 63 hertz, 125 hertz, and so each one of these up there has a corresponding segment down there and vice versa. Alright, so back here. So Close to the speaker, we see we get we've only dropped 10 decibels. And you go, whoa, wait a minute, 10 decibels? We've only dropped 10 decibels in less than 10 feet? And you go, yep, that's right. It drops off very quickly initially. And well, what does a 10 decibel drop really mean? Well, if we plop back over here to this nifty chart, we'll see that a 10 decibel drop here represents a loudness, a perceived loudness from us as 1/2 the loudness. So in 10 feet away from the speaker, or even, let's just be generous here, about 30 feet. So in less than 30 feet away from the speaker itself, the sound has lost half its loudness. And a 3 decibel change, which we said that after, what did I say, after 100 meters, it was about a 3 decibel change, is just perceptible. So if we go back over here, so these, which go from about 3 decibels from this one to this one and this one to this one, are just perceptible changes in loudness. Whereas this 6 decibel change here is noticeable based upon our perception chart. It's a noticeable difference. And right up close, the 10 decibel drop for a very short distance is cutting the loudness in half. So if we want to cut the loudness in half from, or if we want to go the inverse, let's say we're way out here and we want to double the loudness, and let's presume we're way out here. Again, it would drop just by another 3 decibels or less. So if we're out here, very close to the 52 decibel range, and we wanted to double the loudness, then we'd have to go all the way up to 62, which would be way over here. So we'd have to travel 1, 2, almost a little more than 3 of those, which is more than 150 meters, which is certainly approximating, it's more than half the distance to the speaker, almost 2/3, to get a doubling in volume. Then to get another doubling in volume, which would be from 59 to 69, all we have to do is travel, let's see, 50, 60, 70 meters. And then to get another doubling in volume or loudness, we'd have to go from, let's see, 30 meters. And then to go another doubling in volume, we'd have to go less than 10 meters. So see, it's kind of proportional to the not quite the square, but the square of the distance. Now, so we've covered the frequency response here. We covered the amplitude a little bit. This is with one speaker. You notice that the frequency response up close to the speaker, all the bands are almost even, and they're all showing 80 decibels. But if we drop over here to where we're at 65 decibels or 50 meters away, you'll notice that these last two columns, which represent 16K and 8K, have dropped way down. And that's the attenuation of the air, which is nonlinear. That is, the higher frequency sounds, which 16 kilohertz, which is 16,000 hertz, and 8 kilohertz, which is 8,000 hertz, are at the high end of our hearing, and they drop off much more rapidly than the lower ones. So if we go all the way out here, you can see that while the lower frequencies are still doing good, these last two, or this last one or two columns, have dropped to almost zero. So the high frequency portions of the sound at distances away from the source become very, very low. Now, what's very, very low? Well, if it's down in the 10 or 20 decibel range, that's pretty low. That requires kind of a quiet environment to be audible. Now they're still there, and the recorder still potentially I say still records them, and I can still see them in the spectrograms, but they may not be audible, and they may not be audible on the tape. And there is a difference. Audible between when you're there and audible on the tape are two different things. Alright, because the dynamic range of the live environment is far greater than typically far greater than the dynamic range of the audio tape. And so to squish all that dynamic range into a limited situation on the tape, something has to give, either the louds or the lows, and typically both of them do. Both the louds get lowered in intensity, and the softs get raised in intensity to where everything starts getting mushed together, so it tries to make it sound better. Alright, so we demonstrated two phenomena so far, namely that the frequencies are dropped off with distance, particularly at the high end, and that the amplitude drops off with distance, but it's not linear, it's almost an inverse square. Which is important to know, because when you're looking at or listening and comparing these audio tapes, one that's recorded for the same exact signal, one signal coming out of one speaker out here at 1, 2, 3, 4, that's 200 meters, or roughly 600 and some feet. So at 600 and some feet away from the source of 100 decibels, the high-end frequencies are probably not going to be audible. And they're still there, but they're just not going to be audible. So this has a unequal effect on the sense that in a gunshot lingo, because the Mach wave is dominant above 1,000 hertz, so it predominates up in those higher frequencies. So over distance, frequency gets crumbled down, and in fact at large distances most of the high frequency is gone, and you're only left with something that falls into the frequency range of a muzzle blast or a muzzle wave. And so they become more difficult to separate out in the spectrum unless they're separated in time. And by separated in time, I mean that the sonic crack always arrives first before the muzzle wave. So if you got two things that are both in the low frequency and they're clearly not a reflection of the same thing, then the first one is most likely the supersonic crack or the Mach wave. A real example of this, I covered it a little bit last night, is at Oasis Apartments, which is 1,000 feet away, which is far greater than this 200 meters. And yet both the supersonic crack and the muzzle wave are clearly recorded and are clearly visible, but they both fall almost into the same frequency band. It's no longer a high frequency supersonic crack followed by a low frequency muzzle blast. It's sort of like a miniature muzzle followed by a bigger muzzle with just a tad bit of higher frequency on the first one, which is the supersonic crack. And there's other phenomena when you look at a spectrogram that you can use to also separate out the waves, because the supersonic crack starts out being a much shorter duration pulse than a muzzle wave. Given the equipment that they're recorded on, which can't record these things as they accurately are, you can usually see that the supersonic crack is on the order of 1 millisecond and the muzzle wave is on the order of 2.5 to 3 milliseconds in duration. And so when you look at them, if you have something that for one wave, one cycle is in the millisecond range, then you can bias that in favor of being a Mach wave or a supersonic crack. Now, that duration does have a phenomena over distance, just like the frequency, to where the duration of the pulse mushes out into a larger duration over distance, and so you have to look at that. So if you were to measure a supersonic crack right at the bullet versus, say, a supersonic crack at 1,000 feet away, the supersonic crack up close to the bullet might be about one half of 1 millisecond, and out at the distance it might be approaching, let's say, 1.5 milliseconds. So you have to be aware of that phenomena also. And that's where the myth, I call it a myth, those two phenomena, namely the spreading of the duration and the drop in frequency response over a fairly short period of time, or fairly short period of distance, 600 feet, is where the myth of you can't hear the supersonic crack beyond 150 meters comes in. Whether you can or can't depends upon how much noise is in the background. In a quiet environment, you can hear that supersonic crack 800 feet easily. But if there's regular city noise there, then you may not be able to hear the supersonic crack beyond a couple hundred meters. So it's not a fixed thing. And it doesn't and the supersonic crack doesn't necessarily follow the exact same decrease in amplitude as we're showing here. Okay, so as an example, the reason that elephants use low frequency is because, one, they're big and that's where they resonate at, but also for low frequencies you can see that it gets attenuated less for distance, so their low frequency guttural response talking can go miles instead of thousands of feet, whereas human talk doesn't have a chance at those distances. Okay, now let's go ahead and modify this a little. Before we go on here, we'll notice that the one point source that we're using, which I'm representing a speaker as, should produce a fairly even circles, but yet we notice that the 1 decibel lines, contour lines up here on the top are narrower, i.e. closer together than down here. You'll see that there's a noticeable difference, and you have to ask yourself why. So then we once again pull out this ray trace receiver and we click it on to see where the sounds are coming from, and we notice that it's not just a direct source from the speaker to the receiver, but that we also have a reflection coming down here off of these VIP things. And there's obviously something elsewhere too, but I don't really want to go into that now because I'm going to eliminate it here in a minute. And as we drag it down here, you'll see that again we have this ray that comes off of the speaker and reflects off one of those VIP sections, as well as the direct path from the speaker there. So to eliminate this back action over here, I'm going to go ahead now and turn on this barrier, which I use as a reflecting device to better simulate how a speaker responds. That is, a speaker only broadcasts forward, not backwards. And of course when I do that, it's got to recalculate things. So now you see that there are no rays backwards, but that we have two rays from the speaker, one from the speaker, one from a reflection off that backdrop, and then one for the direct path and one for the backdrop reflected here, and they all can focus over there. Now the closer we get over here, we can eliminate most of the reflection from the VIP section. So for people within 150 feet, i.e. 50 meters of the source, which is the speaker, they're not going to get any of the distortion caused by those reflections. But once they get out here ways, let's see, how far out do I have to go before it becomes, there we go, have to get out there quite a ways, over 100 meters, before any reflection from those is observable. But once you're down there close to them, let's say you're sitting in, where was the ADA? Somewhere over there? So they wouldn't have it, but for these people here, there's going to be some distortion introduced by the VIP reflections. And I can't really tell you from here how much it is. It just doesn't give me those capabilities. It's just a qualitative type thing. Alright, so let's go ahead and turn off that receiver there and ask ourselves another question. Well, out here people are hearing the music at 56 decibels, and somewhere between 40 and 70 decibels is conversation. And most people like their concerts to be substantially louder than that. Now we could increase the decibels for the one speaker, but we're never going to be able to get it up big enough and maintain a good frequency response by increasing its power. So what we have to do is gang more than one speaker together. And so the question becomes is, if I want to raise this out there at 200 meters, which is 600 feet, which is a pretty far distance for an amphitheater type environment, how many speakers do I have to add to raise it 10 decibels? Okay, well, let's look at this. Let's go ahead and turn on some of these speakers. And we're at 56.6 now, so remember that. 56.6, not 57, but 56.6. And we'll turn on the speaker that's right in front of it. And we jumped up to 59.3, which is just under 3 decibels. Well, back over here at our chart, we said that that's just perceptible in loudness. Okay. But for one more speaker, it doesn't double the intensity. It jumps it up only by about 0.3 bells or 3 decibels. So you're going, okay, well, if adding one more gave me 3 decibels, then I just have to add 2 more to get up to 10, right? All right, well, let's turn on 2 more. Remember now, we started at 56, just 56.6, and we're going to turn on 2 more of them. And as I turn them on, the whole computation things become slower, so you have to bear with me. So now we've got 4 turned on, 3 additional speakers over the original. Okay, and yet we're only up to 59.6. So you have to keep in mind that this, adding decibels is not like adding 1 and 1. 1 and 1 equals 2 in normal arithmetic, but in this logarithmic scale of decibels, it does not. In fact, on average, to double the power, you're going to have to add 6 times the number of speakers. So let's go and do that. Let's add a total of 6 speakers. Not add, but let's add 5, getting a total of 6. So we got 4, so that would mean 2 more. So now we've got 6 speakers being turned on, and we jumped up to 61.1. Well, we were at 56.6, so we're still 5 decibels short. Okay, you're going, whoa. So we added 5 speakers, and we only got up to 61. We added 5 speakers, and we only gained a little over, not quite 5 decibels. And you're going, wow. So you're beginning to see why when you go to a concert they have so many speakers, because to increase the loudness, it's not a simple matter of adding 1 speaker. You have to add a lot of speakers. And there's somebody who once explained this in terms of crying babies. If you go into a room and there's 1 crying baby, how many crying